My name is Clara Mitchell. I am 23 years old and I serve in the military trained to handle pressure discipline and hardship. But nothing prepared me for what happened last Thanksgiving inside my own parents' house. I walked into the dining room with the smell of roasted turkey cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie filling the air. The long oak table was dressed with autumn leaves, polished silverware, and china that my mother only brought out once a year. Relatives chattered and laughed, glasses clinked, and football murmured from the television in the background. On the surface, it looked like a scene from a family magazine. But beneath that surface, the tension was sharp enough to cut. I sat at the far end of the table next to Aunt Margaret, who gave me a small smile as if to acknowledge the invisible weight pressing on me. I had been gone for months on assignment, living with discipline, camaraderie, and rules that made sense. Returning home always meant stepping back into a battlefield of a different kind, one where my brother Ryan was the favored son. My parents Eleanor and Richard defended him no matter what, and I was expected to stay quiet, endure, and never challenge the order of things. At first, I tried to focus on the food, passing mashed potatoes to my cousin, politely nodding at small talk. Then, Ryan's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. He leaned back in his chair, his wine glass swirling, his smirk spreading across his face. He said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You went into the army because nobody needed you here. You could not make it in the real world, so you hid behind a uniform." His words hit me harder than the wine fumes in the air. Conversations around the table fell silent. Forks froze mid-air. My father Richard stared at the turkey as if carving it was more important than the words being thrown at me. My mother Eleanor narrowed her eyes, waiting for me to react. I swallowed hard, my jaw tight, but I forced myself to answer calmly. I said discipline is not hiding. It is serving. It is sacrifice. Something you would not understand. Gasps rippled. Ryan's smirk widened. Without warning, he pushed his chair back, stood up, and in 2 steps he was beside me. Before I could even blink, his hand swung across my face with a force that snapped my head sideways. The crack echoed louder than the football game. Pain exploded through my jaw. I felt a sudden looseness inside my mouth, a sharp taste of metal. I reached up instinctively and realized 2 of my teeth had shattered. Blood flooded, spilling across my tongue, dripping onto the white linen napkin in my hand, blooming red like an unstoppable stain. The room froze. For a second, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. Then my mother's voice rang out sharp, cruel, triumphant. "You are nothing but a disgrace to this family." My father's words followed like a gavel slamming down. "Get out of this house and do not come back." My vision blurred, my ears rang. I looked around the table, desperate for someone to stand up to say this was wrong, to stop what was happening. My cousins looked down at their plates. An uncle cleared his throat nervously. A cousin's fork clattered against porcelain, but no one spoke. The silence pressed on me heavier than Ryan's blow. Only Aunt Margaret met my eyes, her face pale, her lips trembling as if she wanted to intervene, but fear held her back. Ryan stood over me, still grinning, enjoying the show, enjoying my humiliation in front of everyone. He said softly, but loud enough for the table, "The army did not make you strong. You are still nothing." The words stabbed deeper than the shattered teeth. Blood dripped from my lip onto my dress. My hands shook as I pressed the napkin against my mouth, feeling the sting, the humiliation, the burn of betrayal by those who should have protected me. Yet in that storm of pain, something inside me shifted. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, the sound sharp in the suffocating silence. My whole body trembled, but my voice when it came was steady. "If you choose to shame me in front of everyone, then I will choose justice in front of everyone. I will not be silent anymore." The room tilted. My mother's face twisted in rage. My father's eyes hardened. Ryan chuckled as if this was a performance he had scripted. But inside me, the soldier part, the disciplined part, the part trained never to break, woke fully. As blood stained the napkin and the taste of iron filled my mouth, I swore silently that this humiliation would not be the end of me. It would be the beginning. They thought they had silenced me with a slap with blood with words that erased my worth. but I was already planning my counterstrike. One day soon, every person at that table would see the truth they had tried to hide, and that truth would tear apart the illusion they worshipped. I stared at each of them, blood-dripping pain radiating, and I felt the last thread of hope for their approval snap. What remained was clarity. They had chosen to strike me down in public. I would choose to rise in public. The nightmare of Thanksgiving had only begun. The drive away from my parents' house that night felt longer than any deployment march I had ever endured. Snow swirled across the windshield headlights cutting through the darkness, but all I could see in the mirror was my own face swollen and smeared with blood. My jaw ached with every breath. The empty space where two teeth used to be throbbed with each heartbeat. I pressed the napkin harder against my mouth, the fabric stiff with dried crimson, but the real wound was not in my mouth. It was in my chest. Betrayal sat heavy there, pressing down like a weight I could not lift. For years, I had told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I served honorably, if I sacrificed, then maybe my family would finally see me. But tonight proved the truth. They had not only refused to see me, they had chosen to humiliate me in front of every relative, to strip me of dignity as if I were a stranger who had wandered into their home. My brother Ryan's slap had broken more than teeth. It had broken the last fragile illusion that blood ties equaled love. As the road stretched on, memories collided inside me. Ryan at 12 years old bragging about skipping class and my mother laughing, calling him clever. Me at 12 bringing home a certificate for academic excellence and my father muttering, "Keep it up, nothing special." Ryan at 17 drunk in the garage knocking over boxes and my parents rushing to cover for him. Me at 17 announcing I wanted to apply for summer military training and my mother snapping, "No daughter of mine will embarrass us that way." The imbalance was so old, so ingrained, that for years I had accepted it like gravity. Tonight, gravity had finally crushed me. I pulled the car to the side of the river, parking beneath bare trees swaying in the wind. I shut off the engine. The silence roared louder than the tires had. I sat with my forehead against the steering wheel, shaking, tears running hot down my face, mixing with the sting of my split lip. The image replayed over and over, Ryan's hand swinging, the sound of the crack, the red blooming on white linen, my mother's words cutting deeper than any blade. "You are nothing but a disgrace. My father's cold decree. Get out. Do not come back." Their voices echoed in my skull until I wanted to scream. But no sound came. Only the ragged breaths of someone who had been stripped bare. I closed my eyes, and in that dark space another voice came, not my parents, not Ryan. It was Captain Lewis, my commanding officer from training. I remembered the day he had pulled me aside after I pushed through a grueling obstacle course with a sprained ankle. "Mitchell," he had said, "discipline is not about obedience. It is about knowing when to resist, when to refuse surrender, when to stand, even if you are alone." I had nodded back then, too young to fully grasp his meaning. Now, parked by the river with blood drying on my chin, those words landed differently. This was not just family cruelty. This was a battlefield, and I had been fighting with no weapons, no plan, hoping for mercy that would never come. I leaned back in the seat, staring out at the frozen water glinting under the moonlight. My tears slowed, replaced by something colder, steadier. Resolve. The humiliation was still fresh, the pain still raw, but inside I felt a spark. They had thrown me out. They thought I would slink away, ashamed, broken, silent. But I was a soldier. I had endured worse from enemies who did not share my blood. If I could survive field exercises in the mud with no food, if I could push through drills until my lungs burned, I could survive this. And not just survive, fight back. The thought startled me at first. Fight back against my own family. But then I remembered how Ryan had laughed as I bled, how my father had not looked at me once, focusing on carving turkey instead, how my mother had found pleasure in calling me worthless. The silence of the cousins, the aunts, the uncles who had watched and done nothing. That silence had been the loudest betrayal of all. I had fought to protect people I barely knew in service, yet here in my own home, no one had lifted a finger for me. That realization shifted something permanent. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing the mess, but no longer caring. In the reflection of the glass, I saw not the broken daughter, but the soldier who had been forged through trials. My lips trembled as I whispered to myself, "They want me gone. They will see what gone really means. They think they can erase me. I will erase their illusions." My voice grew steadier with each word. I was not broken. Not yet. I started the engine again, the rumble grounding me. Driving back toward my small apartment felt like retreating to a safe house after battle. The fluorescent streetlights passed one after another like markers of a new phase. Each mile took me further from the table where I had bled and closer to a future where I would no longer be their victim. Yet with each mile also came a flood of grief. I could not deny the ache. These were my parents, my brother, my kin. The people who should have celebrated my achievements, supported my service, cared for me. And instead, they had spit me out like I was nothing. The child in me wept at that truth even as the soldier in me sharpened it into armor. Emotional highs and lows collided in waves, grief crashing down resolve, lifting me back up, anger, searing hope, flickering. By the time I reached my apartment building, my face was stiff with dried tears and blood. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing. Inside the small space that smelled of detergent and instant coffee, I collapsed onto the couch. The silence wrapped around me again, but now it felt less like suffocation and more like a shield. I curled beneath a blanket, staring at the ceiling, my jaw throbbing. The betrayal replayed in my mind, but so did the vow I had spoken. If they chose humiliation in public, then I would choose justice in public. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it came in fragments. I dreamed of the table of voices chanting disgrace of Ryan's laugh, turning into a roar. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Dawn seeped through the blinds, pale and cold. I sat up slowly, pressing a hand to my mouth, wincing at the ache. My reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger. Bruised, battered, but with eyes that glowed with something fierce. Not fear, not submission, determination. That morning I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the small table with a notebook. I began to write everything down. Each insult, each moment of favoritism, each time I had sacrificed and been dismissed. The memories poured out decades of imbalance, spilling onto the pages. Writing was painful but clarifying. The list grew long. Ryan's bicycle, my denied science program, his tuition covered while mine was ignored, my checks mailed home while he chased schemes. By the time I finished several pages, my hand cramped, but my mind was clearer. Patterns stared back at me. A map of years spent as the invisible daughter, the expendable one. Seeing it in ink stripped away the denial I had carried. This was not a bad night. This was a lifetime of erasure crystallized into one violent slap. I closed the notebook slowly, exhaling. The soldier in me knew the truth. No battle is won in a day. This war with my family would not be quick, but it would be decisive. And it had already begun the moment blood hit that napkin. When the pain in my jaw pulsed like a drum and the memories of that slap still echoed, I realized I had to go further back to make sense of why it had come to this. Betrayal that sharp does not appear in a single night. It is built brick by brick across years of silence and favoritism. The Thanksgiving humiliation was not an isolated act. It was the inevitable conclusion of a pattern that began when I was barely old enough to understand the difference between love and indifference. I was 7 years old when I first felt the imbalance. For my birthday that year, my mother Eleanor handed me a second-hand sweater folded neatly in a paper bag. She smiled absently and told me to be grateful. A week later, it was Ryan's second birthday. He unwrapped a brand-new red bicycle with training wheels that gleamed under the living room lights. My father, Richard, hoisted him onto his shoulders and paraded him around the house, shouting, "Look at my boy, he is going places!" My mother clapped her hands, her eyes bright with pride. I sat on the couch clutching my sweater, the tag still itchy against my skin, wondering why my straight A's on my report card had earned only a pat on the head and a reminder to keep it up. That was the first lesson. Ryan was the star. I was the dependable background. By the time I was 9, the favoritism had already deepened into a routine. When Ryan moved up a grade, he brought home a report card filled with C's. My parents celebrated by buying him that same bicycle he had outgrown, replaced with a bigger one shining with chrome. When I asked if I could join a summer science program offered by the local community college, my father shook his head and said, "Maybe next year, sweetheart. We just don't have the money." I nodded quietly, but inside I wondered how money appeared so easily for his toys, yet never for my passions. That summer, Ryan rode his bicycle down the street with friends while I sat on the porch with a library book. I taught myself about constellations and planets while my parents shouted encouragements to Ryan as he tried to balance without hands. At 14, the division was cemented. My parents decided it was time for us to switch bedrooms. Ryan got the larger one with 2 windows, space for a desk, and enough room for a television. I was moved into the smaller room with peeling wallpaper and a single narrow window that looked out onto the side fence. My father explained that boys needed more space to grow. I nodded, but the resentment burned deep in my chest. Ryan decorated his room with posters, invited friends over, and spent hours laughing loudly. I sat at my cramped desk pushed against the wall, studying under a flickering lamp. Every time I aced a test, my mother would say, "That's nice, dear, keep it up." Every time Ryan kicked a soccer ball across the field, my parents shouted as if he had won the World Cup. At school recitals, when I played piano flawlessly, they clapped politely. When Ryan tripped over his shoelaces during a game, they roared with pride because at least he was trying. The message was clear and constant. Ryan was the son who mattered. I was the daughter who managed. At church gatherings, my mother would beam when talking about Ryan's charm while dismissing me with a quick nod. "Clara is responsible," she would say, and then move on to tell stories of Ryan's latest antics. Responsible became my label, a word that meant reliable but never cherished. The applause always went to him. The quiet endurance was reserved for me. When I turned 18, the tension reached a breaking point. I had worked hard, studied late into the nights, and been accepted into a state university with partial scholarships. But just as I was filling out loan forms, my father lost his job at the auto plant where he had worked for 2 decades. The company downsized, and despite his seniority, he was among the first to go. Overnight, our finances collapsed. My mother's part-time receptionist job at a dental office barely covered groceries. The focus shifted instantly from my future to survival. I thought maybe finally they would support me, but instead, the burden fell on me. I should have been the one receiving help, but instead, I became the helper. I took on 3 jobs. I waitressed in the morning at a local diner, worked at the campus library in the afternoon, and did data entry at night from my dorm room. I slept barely 4 hours a night, surviving on caffeine and sheer will. Still, I kept going because the alternative was giving up on my education. Meanwhile, Ryan, still in high school, lived without worry. My parents somehow managed to pay for his sports equipment, his weekend trips with friends, and eventually his tuition when his time came. They even took out a second mortgage on the house to cover his fees, something they had never even considered for me. I remember calling home exhausted after a double shift and hearing my mother brag about Ryan's new laptop. "He needs the best tools to succeed," she told me while I stared at the outdated computer on my desk held together with tape. That was the moment I fully understood my role. I was the safety net. Ryan was the hope. I was expected to sacrifice. He was expected to dream. The imbalance was not only tolerated, it was celebrated. My father once told me, "You work hard, Clara, but Ryan has vision." Those words echoed in my mind for years. Vision excused his failures. Hard work never earned me more than silence. I internalized the message I was there to carry the weight, not to shine. Looking back now, those years shaped everything. I had been conditioned to accept less love, fewer rewards, almost no recognition, while being pushed to carry more responsibility. When I joined the military at 18, I did it partly to escape that suffocating home. I thought maybe distance would equal freedom, but even then, I kept sending money back. Even then, I kept hoping that sacrifice would finally win me a place at their table. That hope lasted until the night Ryan shattered my teeth in front of everyone and my parents told me to get out. That night proved what I had always known deep down. In my family, Ryan would always be treasured. I would always be expendable, until I chose to change it. Every slap, every dismissal, every stolen opportunity had led to that moment. And as I sat in my apartment bleeding and aching, I finally saw the pattern with clarity. I was not broken by one night. I was broken by years of favoritism that had stacked against me like bricks, each one heavier until I could no longer carry them. And now, with the soldier's discipline and the daughter's pain combined, I knew I would not just endure anymore. I would resist. I would strike back, not with fists, but with truth. By the time I signed my enlistment papers and completed basic training, I thought I had stepped into a new world, one where effort would finally be measured fairly. The military was harsh, but it was honest. If you pushed, you advanced. If you failed, you tried again. There were no parents twisting the scoreboard, no brothers stealing the spotlight. But even as I began to carve out a life of my own, the invisible cord that tied me to my family tightened. At first, it was small. A phone call from my mother, Eleanor, saying the electricity bill had slipped through the cracks. Could I maybe help just this once? I wired the money. My father, Richard, called a month later, his voice heavy, saying the mortgage company was breathing down their necks. I told myself it was my duty. After all, I was earning a steady paycheck and I could live simply. I sent the money. Soon there was no request at all. There was only expectation. My checks became their safety net. $12,000 a year poured from my modest military salary into their household. I tightened my belt, skipped vacations, lived with secondhand furniture and instant noodles while they lived comfortably without fear of foreclosure. Each time I called home, they would mention another crisis that seemed to vanish once my deposit cleared. What cut deepest was how they spoke of it. Never gratitude, always entitlement. My father would say, "Well, Clara can handle it. She's responsible." My mother would sigh. "Ryan needs our help right now, you understand?" I did understand. I understood that my role was not daughter, it was provider. The bitterness grew when I saw where the money went. Ryan was 22, restless and spoiled, chasing one scheme after another. I bought him a laptop with my own savings because he claimed he wanted to start an online business. 3 months later, I discovered he had sold it to pay off gambling debts. My parents shook their heads, excusing him. Boys make mistakes. He'll learn. When I questioned why my sacrifice was invisible while his failures were forgiven, my mother snapped that I was jealous. The word stung. I was not jealous of Ryan's recklessness. I was enraged that my sweat and hours of exhaustion were being funneled into his irresponsibility. Still, I kept paying. There were moments when sending money gave me fleeting joy, like the time I covered a car payment and imagined them driving safely without fear of repossession. I told myself this was love, this was family. But the joy never lasted. The next crisis always came. The next bill always landed in my lap. It was like running on a hamster wheel faster each year, but never moving forward. Meanwhile, Ryan strutted through life with no weight on his shoulders. He drove a newer model car that my father co-signed for. He wore designer sneakers. He bragged about his freedom while I clipped coupons. The imbalance stretched me thin. During deployments, I lived on ration packs, training in the heat, writing letters at night by dim light. On payday, I sent money home only to hear later about Ryan's weekend trip to Chicago or his investment in some half-baked idea. He tried drop shipping a food truck he never bought even a subscription box for pet toys that collapsed in 3 months. Each time he failed, my parents comforted him, cheered him on, spoke of his vision. Each time I succeeded, my parents dismissed it as expected. When I graduated advanced training with honors, my father simply said, "Good. Now focus on helping your brother." There was one evening in particular when the truth cut sharp. I had scraped together $2,000 to surprise my parents with a weekend trip to Chicago for my mother's 60th birthday. Theater tickets, a Michelin star dinner, the works. I sent them off proud that I could give them something joyful. When they returned, all they talked about was how Ryan had sent a sweet card, how thoughtful he was. My gift was acknowledged only with a flat. We had a nice time. I sat in my small apartment with peeling paint, staring at the empty jar on my table, labeled emergency fund. My best friend from training had once called it the guilt jar. She was right. It was never for me. It was always for them. The resentment built quietly, each sacrifice another brick on the pile. Yet outwardly, I smiled, endured, wired the money. I told myself one day they would see. One day they would appreciate. But deep down, I knew. I was not seen as a daughter. I was seen as an ATM with legs. Ryan drank, gambled, failed, and still he was the pride. I sweated, saved, and bled, and still I was the disappointment. One night after deployment, I came home to find Ryan lounging on the porch of my parents' house, bragging about a new venture. He wanted to create a fitness app. He had no coding skills, no investors, no plan. But my parents clapped and nodded, their eyes bright with hope. I had just completed a grueling assignment overseas, had spent months away from comfort, and all I received was a quick nod. Ryan spun empty promises, and they celebrated as if he had discovered gold. That night, watching them laugh, I understood more clearly than ever. Nothing I did would ever be enough. The emotional toll gnawed at me. Some nights I lay awake, counting the years of sacrifice, the thousands of dollars poured into their lives while mine stood still. I imagined what I could have had: a small house of my own, a car without rust, a savings account that grew instead of shrank. But each time I tried to hold on to that vision, guilt strangled me. My mother's voice into my head. Your father is under stress. Ryan needs a chance. You're the strong one, Clara. And I believed it because believing otherwise meant admitting a painful truth. They did not love me in the way I needed. They only valued what I could provide. The breaking point edged closer with each request. When my father needed surgery, I took unpaid leave to care for him. I cooked, cleaned, drove him to appointments. At the end, he complained that I had arranged his pills incorrectly and muttered that Ryan would have done better. Ryan had not shown up once. My chest burned with rage. I wanted to scream, but instead, I swallowed it like I always did. Looking back now, I see how the wheels spun faster until the night of Thanksgiving. That dinner table was not a sudden eruption. It was the final symptom of years of imbalance. My parents had conditioned me to give without thanks, to accept less, to endure more. Ryan had been trained to believe he was untouchable, the golden son, immune from consequences. And I had been trained to believe I was replaceable, useful only as long as I produced. When Ryan's slap shattered my teeth, it was not just violence. It was the physical embodiment of everything that had come before. Every ignored achievement, every siphoned paycheck, every time they looked at him with pride and at me with indifference. The slap was the summary of years spent as the invisible ATM, the expendable daughter. As I sat in my apartment after that night, bruised and aching, I finally saw it with clarity. They would never stop taking. They would never see me as anything more than what I gave. And if I wanted to change the pattern, I could not beg or hope. I would have to resist. I would have to turn the same discipline I used in uniform against the family that had drained me for years. That resolve hardened inside me like steel. The years of sacrifice had built the foundation for one moment of rebellion, and that moment was coming soon. The moment that would change everything unfolded beneath the soft glow of chandelier light and the clatter of silverware against porcelain. Thanksgiving had always been a ritual in the Mitchell household, but for me, it was a ritual of endurance, not celebration. That night, I arrived with cautious hope, carrying dishes I had prepared, standing straighter in my uniform jacket, though no one mentioned it. The table stretched long, covered in food I had spent hours preparing and paying for. Yet the atmosphere weighed heavy with the same undercurrent I had felt all my life. My parents sat at the head. Ryan reclined with a wineglass, already smirking, as if the show was about to begin. At first, there was small talk. An uncle joked about football scores. A cousin passed the cranberry sauce. I tried to blend into the conversation, tried to let the smell of turkey and stuffing soften the tension. But then, as always, Ryan could not resist. He leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting with malice, and said loud enough for the entire room, "So Clara, did the Army teach you how to fix a broken family? Or are you still just running from the fact nobody needs you?" The words sliced through me. Laughter rose from a couple of relatives, nervous and unsure, but loud enough to sting. I swallowed hard, choosing discipline over anger, and answered evenly. Service is not running. It is sacrifice. It is honor, things you clearly do not understand. My tone was calm, but I saw the smirk vanish for only a second before rage flared in his eyes. Without warning, Ryan pushed his chair back the scrape against the hardwood, shrieking in the silence. He stood looming over me, his breath heavy with wine. He hissed, "You think wearing a uniform makes you better. You are still nothing." Then his hand whipped across my face with a force that stunned me. The crack echoed around the room louder than the muted football game. I gasped, clutching my mouth. A metallic taste filled my throat. Pain seared through my jaw. My tongue found emptiness where two teeth had shattered jagged edges cutting into my gums. Blood gushed, spilling over my lips, dripping down my chin, staining the napkin I pressed desperately against my face. The room froze. Gasps rippled. Someone dropped a fork. Aunt Margaret whispered, "Oh, dear God!" But no one moved. No one stopped him. My father sat rigid at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on the turkey as if the carving knife in his hand was more important than the sight of his daughter bleeding. My mother's voice rang sharp, cruel, triumphant. "You are nothing but a disgrace to this family." She did not move to help me. She did not even blink at the sight of my blood. Ryan was not finished. His hand struck again, harder this time, snapping my head to the side. My lips split wide, warm liquid gushed, staining the white fabric in my hands crimson. He leaned down close enough that I felt the heat of his breath. He whispered, "The army did not make you strong. You are still the weak little girl who was never wanted." Then he leaned back, grinning as if he had won a prize. The humiliation seared deeper than the physical pain. My cousins stared at their plates. An uncle cleared his throat, muttering something about the weather. No one intervened. The betrayal of their silence pressed against me heavier than Ryan's blows. The only eyes that met mine were Aunt Margaret's, wide and trembling, her lips quivering as though she wanted to stand, but fear rooted her to her chair. My father finally spoke, his voice, cold, final. "Paying bills does not make you family. Get out. Do not come back." The words were daggers. For 8 years, I had sent them money, covered their mortgage, their utilities, their car payments, nearly $30,000 a year, so they could live comfortably while I lived like a shadow. And with one sentence, my father erased it all as if my sacrifice had never existed. The room spun. My teeth throbbed, blood filled my mouth. Tears blurred my vision, but inside me, something snapped. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor like a scream in the suffocating silence. My hands shook. My body ached, but when I spoke, my voice was steady. "If money does not make me family, then maybe you should try living without mine." The words hung heavy in the air, sharper than any knife. My mother's face twisted, her lips curling into a snarl. "Do not you dare threaten me," she spat. But the shift had already happened. The daughter who once begged for recognition, who once swallowed every insult, was gone. Blood dripped onto the napkin, into the linen tablecloth. My heart pounded, but my eyes locked on Ryan's grin, on my father's cold stare, on my mother's venom. I realized then that the slap was not just about anger, it was about control. They wanted to prove I was still beneath them, still the expendable one, still the scapegoat. But the soldier in me, the disciplined fighter, recognized something else, a weakness. They needed me more than I needed them. I was the provider. I was the backbone. And tonight, in front of every relative they had, severed the cord that held me captive. The silence grew suffocating. My cousins avoided my gaze. The smell of turkey turned rancid in my nose. Aunt Margaret's eyes glistened with tears, but no one else spoke. My mother hissed again. "You think you can humiliate us with your money? You are nothing. Always nothing." The words pierced, but for the first time in my life they did not sink into me. They bounced off the steel that was hardening inside. I stood fully now, towering above my chair, my body trembling but unbroken. Blood smeared down my chin, staining my dress, dripping onto the hardwood. I looked at each face in turn, memorizing the silence, the complicity, the betrayal. Then I whispered loud enough for all to hear. "This is the last time you will see me like this." They thought they had silenced me with violence and shame, but what they had given me was clarity. As I turned and walked away from the table, the room remained frozen. My father's eyes never lifted from the turkey. My mother seethed. Ryan laughed softly, cruelly, certain he had won. But deep inside me, the vow had already formed. They had chosen to disgrace me in public. I would choose to reveal their truths in public. The battlefield had shifted. The war was only beginning. When I stumbled back into my apartment that night, the silence was deafening. My jaw throbbed with every heartbeat. The bathroom mirror showed a face I barely recognized. Swollen cheek, split lip, 2 teeth, shattered eyes rimmed with red from both pain and tears. I pressed a damp towel against the bruises, watching water turn pink as it mixed with the dried blood. For a moment, the sight made me feel smaller than ever, like the girl who had always been dismissed, overlooked, erased. But then another thought pierced through the haze. If I could survive training in the mud, if I could survive endless drills and the crushing weight of military expectations, I could survive this. The sting in my mouth was nothing compared to the humiliation that burned hotter than fire. Humiliation could crush me, or it could become fuel. I walked into the living room and dropped onto the couch, breathing hard. My military duffel still sat by the door, half unpacked from my return home. I dragged it closer, pulling out folded uniforms, carefully arranged papers, and a stack of mail that my mother had asked me to pick up weeks earlier when she was too busy. It had sat forgotten at the bottom of the bag. I dumped the pile onto the table, thinking only of distracting myself. Among the envelopes one had already been slid open. The logo of a health insurance company was printed in bold across the top. My mother had always been careless with mail, sometimes asking me to fetch it and then tossing it aside. I almost shoved it away too, but the corner caught my eye. The name printed in black letters, Ryan Mitchell. I froze. My first instinct was to toss it aside, but curiosity sharpened by years of suspicion tugged at me. I unfolded the paper. Lines of medical jargon filled the page, sterile words masking something devastating. My eyes stopped on one sentence that stood stark against the rest. Diagnosis: non-obstructive azoospermia. Patient unlikely to father biological children. The words blurred for a moment as I blinked, trying to process. Ryan. My brother. The golden son. The heir my parents had placed all their pride and future upon. Infertile. My breath caught. For years he had strutted with arrogance, mocking me, declaring himself the true man of the family. He had humiliated me at that dinner table, raised his hand against me, shattered my teeth while everyone watched. And yet beneath his performance was a truth he had hidden. A truth my parents must have known and kept secret. A truth they would do anything to protect. At first, a flicker of pity rose in me. Infertility was not a crime. It was not something to laugh at. For a second, I thought of Ryan as the scared boy he must have been when he found out. But the pity evaporated quickly, scorched by the memory of his smirk as my blood dripped onto the napkin. He had no pity for me. He had no mercy. He only had cruelty. If he had chosen compassion, maybe the secret would have remained his. But he had chosen violence. That choice had consequences. I leaned back on the couch, the paper trembling in my hands. Flashes of memory lit up. Ryan drunk in the garage at 17, shouting, "I am the man here, no one else." My mother dodging questions from neighbors about when she would become a grandmother. My father bragging about Ryan's legacy while dismissing my service. All of it fit together now. The secret explained the desperate defense, the obsession with maintaining his image, the fury whenever anyone questioned him. My parents had built their world on the illusion of Ryan's future. Without it, their narrative collapsed. I folded the paper carefully, slid it into a folder, and carried it to my desk. I scanned it into my computer, saving copies on a hidden drive, then sent a discreet copy to Aunt Margaret with a single line attached. "You will understand why soon. Do not stop me." My fingers trembled as I typed, but my resolve did not. Sitting in the dim light, I whispered aloud to the empty room. He called me nothing. He laughed as I bled. But this is the truth that will end his laughter. My voice grew steadier. They think I am powerless. They think I am still the little girl clutching a sweater while my brother got the bicycle. But I am not powerless. I am a soldier, and I know how to fight with what I have. The hours stretched. Pain pulsed in my mouth, but clarity sharpened in my mind. I reviewed every humiliation, every financial sacrifice, every cruel word. I wrote them down page after page until the list was long enough to choke me, but instead of choking it freed me. Seeing the pattern laid bare reminded me that this was not a single night's cruelty. This was a lifetime of abuse disguised as family. I remembered Captain Lewis's words again, echoing from a training field where mud caked my boots and exhaustion clouded my mind. Mitchell discipline is not about blind obedience. It is about choosing the moment to resist. I understood him now. My moment had arrived. I closed the notebook and stood in front of the mirror again. My face was bruised, swollen blood, still drying in the corners of my mouth. But when I looked into my eyes, I did not see defeat. I saw resolve. They had stripped me of dignity in front of everyone, but in doing so, they had given me clarity. They had freed me from the last thread of hope. And now, I would use the truth they had hidden to tear down the illusion they worshipped. The night outside was silent snow falling in sheets. I stood by the window and whispered one last vow. They wanted me gone. They wanted me silent. But I will speak, and when I do, the truth will burn brighter than their lies. The morning after Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed before the sun even rose. I ignored it at first, curling deeper into the blanket on my couch, jaw aching, head pounding, but the noise would not stop. Dozens of missed calls stacked on the screen, each one more insistent than the last. When I finally pressed play, my mother's voice erupted through the speaker, shrill and accusing. "Clara, what have you done? The mortgage company just called. The payment was canceled. Your father is sick with stress. Do you want to kill him?" The line cut only to be replaced by another. My father this time, his tone cold, commanding. "Whatever stunt you are pulling ends now. You think you can walk away from this family. You will regret it." He threatened to call a lawyer to drag me into court for abandonment for elder neglect. Words sharpened into weapons meant to pull me back into line. Then came Ryan. His voice was venomous, dripping with rage. "You think you are clever, sis, canceling payments. The car got repossessed this morning. I had a meeting and now I am stranded because of you. Fix this. You always fix things. You are jealous, you always have been, and now you are pathetic." I stared at the phone bile rising in my throat. Even now, even after spilling my blood on their table, they still believed I was the one who owed them. By 9 a.m., the tone shifted. The calls turned desperate. My mother's voice softened, tried to pull at old strings of guilt. "Sweetheart, if we said anything wrong last night, we are sorry. Your father is having chest pains. Please call us back." The pattern was clear. Rage threats, guilt, then begging. It was the cycle they had used for years, a carousel designed to keep me spinning in place. But this time, the ride had stopped. I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen. I brewed coffee slowly, deliberately, the smell filling the apartment like a shield against their voices. For once, I let their panic play out without rescuing them. I sat at the table, sipped from the mug, and reminded myself of the vow I had made. They had chosen to break me in public. I would choose to reveal them in public. Still, the weight pressed down. I would not pretend I was immune. Tears blurred my vision as I thought of the years I had sacrificed, the times I had answered those calls, the nights I had skipped meals to wire money home. My chest ached with the familiar guilt. Maybe I was cruel. Maybe I had gone too far. Then Captain Lewis's voice rose again in memory. "Mitchell, the enemy, will always try to control your mind before they control your body. Do not surrender your mind." His words anchored me. By the afternoon, Aunt Margaret called. Her voice trembled, not with accusation, but with concern. "Clara, dear, things are in chaos here. The utilities have been shut off. The alarm system is down. Your parents even called the police this morning because they thought the house was hacked." I closed my eyes, picturing my father shouting at officers in uniform, my mother wringing her hands, Ryan sulking in the background. It would have been comical if it had not been so tragic. Then Aunt Margaret's voice softened. "I just want you to know some of us see what you have done for them all these years. We were told Ryan was the one helping, but now we know." Her words cracked something inside me. For the first time, someone outside had acknowledged the truth. Later, a text appeared on my phone. "Natalie," my cousin simply wrote, "I understand why you did what you did. Take care of yourself." That small message, brief and quiet, felt like oxygen after suffocation. I was not crazy. I was not cruel. I was no longer alone. But my parents were relentless. Emails arrived long and winding. My mother insisted family must stay together. My father declared I had made my point, and now it was time to stop the charade. Ryan left a voicemail dripping with venom, promising that everyone would know I was a monster. I saved them all, each message a piece of evidence in the case I was building, not for a court, but for the court of truth. Days passed. The fallout grew heavier. Mortgage default notices, utility warnings, the car sitting in an impound lot. Ryan moved back into their house, contributing nothing but complaints. My parents alternated between accusing me of betrayal and begging me to return. But each time I felt the old guilt stirring, I pressed my fingers against the bruise on my cheek, traced the gap where my teeth had been, and remembered. I remembered the slap, the blood, the silence of my relatives, my father's decree that I was not family. The memory burned away the guilt until only resolve remained. There were nights when I broke down when the loneliness howled louder than the wind outside my apartment. I would curl under the blanket, tears soaking the pillow, whispering to the darkness, "Maybe I am heartless. Maybe I am what they say." But each time the memory of Aunt Margaret's words of Natalie's message lifted me again. "You are not heartless. You are free." Slowly, I began to plan. My family's pattern was clear. They relied on secrecy, on silence, on presenting the perfect image to the world. They depended on me staying quiet, hidden behind duty and shame. If I wanted real justice, I would have to break that silence in front of the same audience that had watched me bleed. I would need to strike not in whispers, but in daylight. As the week ended, the phone calls lessened, shifting from frantic to cold. My parents sent one final email. A family dinner, they said, a chance to reconcile. They wrote as if nothing had happened, as if the slap and the blood and the exile could be smoothed over with roast chicken and forced smiles. But I knew better. This was not reconciliation. This was containment. They wanted to pull me back under control, to rewrite the narrative before it spread further. What they did not know was that I already held the key to their unraveling. In a folder on my desk lay the insurance letter with Ryan's diagnosis. The secret they had buried for years, the truth that would tear apart their illusion. I pressed my hand against the folder, feeling the paper through the manila cover, and whispered to myself, "They tried to gaslight me. They tried to bury me. But the soldier in me has already chosen the next move. At the family dinner, they will not be the ones writing the story. I will." The invitation came from Aunt Margaret, hand-written and careful. She wanted to host a dinner 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. She said a chance for the family to mend what was broken. I knew her intentions were kind, but I also knew my parents had pressed her to arrange it. They wanted control back, wanted the narrative rewritten before the humiliation of that holiday spread further. Part of me wanted to refuse to stay hidden, to let them drown in the chaos they had created. But another part of me, the soldier who had tasted both discipline and betrayal, recognized the opportunity. This was the stage. This was where silence could be broken. The night of the dinner arrived cold and crisp snow crunching under my boots as I walked toward Margaret's home. The windows glowed warmly. Laughter floated faintly into the night air. My stomach clenched not from fear, but from anticipation. In my bag, I carried the folder, the document that had burned like a live coal ever since I discovered it. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for days, the words, the timing, the look I would give each of them. Tonight was not about revenge. Tonight was about truth. Inside the dining room was smaller than my parents', but filled with more warmth. Margaret had set the table with simple china and candles. Relatives gathered coats draped on chairs, voices polite but strained. The tension hummed beneath every smile. My parents sat together, rigid, their expressions a mask of control. Ryan lounged beside them, his jaw tight, his eyes darting when he saw me. "My mother," Eleanor's voice was the first to break the quiet. "Clara," she said sharply, "you owe this family an apology for your behavior, for your disrespect." Her tone made it clear she believed she still held the power. I sat slowly, folding my hands in front of me, feeling the weight of every gaze. My father, Richard, leaned forward, his voice cold. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone. This foolishness with money ends now. If you want to be part of this family, you will accept your place." Ryan smirked, lifting his glass. "Welcome back to the children's table," he sneered. The laughter from a few cousins was thin and nervous. I let the words hang in the air, then pushed back my chair and rose. My knees trembled, but my voice was steady. "Enough!" My words cut across the room like a blade. For 8 years, I sent money, nearly $30,000 a year, to keep your lights on, your mortgage paid, your cars running. While Ryan failed venture after venture, I worked 60-hour weeks and bled my salary into this family. And what did I get in return? A slap across the face that shattered my teeth. My father's decree that I am not family. My mother's venom calling me nothing. Gasps rippled, eyes widened. For the first time, the silence did not suffocate me. It suffocated them. My father slammed his fist on the table, rattling plates. "That is not how it happened. You are exaggerating." My mother hissed. "You are twisting things. You always play the victim." Ryan laughed bitterly. "Jealousy makes you pathetic." I felt my heartbeat steady as I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. My hands no longer shook. I laid the document on the table, the paper sliding into the candlelight. I spoke clearly, each word precise. "You call me nothing. You call me jealous. But the truth is, this, the pride of this family, the son you worship, cannot have children." The room fell into a silence so thick it pressed against the walls. I read aloud the words that had seared into my mind. Diagnosis: non-obstructive azoospermia. Patient unlikely to father biological children. My voice did not waver. Ryan's face drained of color, his smirk collapsing into shock. My mother shot up from her chair, eyes blazing. "You vile, vindictive girl!" she screamed. My father's hands trembled as he snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the lines, his lips moving without sound. Whispers erupted around the table. An uncle muttered, "Good Lord." A cousin covered her mouth with her hand. Margaret gasped softly, but her eyes held mine steady, supportive. Ryan stumbled to his feet, his voice cracking. "You had no right. That is private." He looked to his parents for rescue, but their faces were frozen masks. I stood taller, blood rushing through me, not from shame, but from release. "You struck me. You humiliated me. You told me I was nothing. But this is the truth you hid while you demanded my silence. This is who you are." The silence broke into a storm. Relatives spoke at once, some horrified, some whispering furiously. My mother screamed that I was lying, that I had fabricated it. But the evidence was there, printed, undeniable. My father slumped back, his eyes hollow. The illusion was crumbling. Ryan lunged as if to grab the paper, but Margaret stepped between us, her voice firm for the first time in years. "Enough, Ryan. Sit down." The command stunned him, and for a moment the boy who had been coddled his whole life looked small, exposed. I gathered my bag, my heart pounding with both fear and triumph. I looked around the room one last time. This is the truth. You can choose to keep living in lies, but I will not. I am done being your scapegoat, your wallet, your shadow. I am finished. I turned and walked out, the murmurs rising behind me, the air charged with chaos. Snow swirled as I stepped into the night, but the cold felt bracing, cleansing. For the first time, the weight of silence lifted. They had tried to bury me with humiliation. Instead, I had buried their illusion with truth. The fallout from that dinner spread faster than wildfire through dry brush. Within days, whispers turned into full conversations across our extended family and within the church community my parents valued so dearly. Eleanor Mitchell, once admired for her iron control and picture-perfect family image, became the subject of gossip in hushed tones. Richard, who had carried himself as a stoic patriarch, could not even walk into the grocery store without noticing sideways glances. And Ryan, my brother, the golden son, found himself more isolated than he had ever been in his life. It began with his engagement. He had been set to marry a young woman named Stephanie, whose family was proud of the match. She had sat beside him through many family gatherings, smiling politely as my parents boasted of his so-called business ventures. But after the dinner, the truth could not be hidden. Within a week, Stephanie's parents called off the engagement. They told their daughter bluntly that deception had no place in their family, that if Ryan and his parents had hidden something as important as his infertility, they would hide other things too. Stephanie herself sent a short message to Ryan. "I wish you had told me yourself. Goodbye." The ring was returned, the wedding plans dismantled, the humiliation public. Ryan's friends, the ones who used to drink with him and cheer on his half-baked schemes, began to disappear too. Investors he had courted for his supposed fitness app withdrew support immediately. One man wrote in an email that circled back to me, "If you cannot be honest about your own life, how can you be honest in business?" Ryan raged, slammed doors, cursed my name, but his fury changed nothing. The truth had broken the illusion he had built. My parents fared no better. At church, where my mother had always bragged about Ryan's potential and my father had held court as a man of respect, the whispers grew louder each Sunday. Some pretended politeness, but I knew from messages sent by cousins that the gossip was relentless. Eleanor had slapped her daughter at the dinner table. Richard had declared her no longer family, and the son they had built their identity around was not the legacy they had promised. Neighbors who once stopped to chat began to cross the street. Old friends avoided phone calls. Their circle shrank until all they had left was their shame. And me, I was called cruel by some. A few relatives sent me messages saying I had gone too far, that infertility was private, that no one should expose such a thing. For a night, those words stabbed deep. I cried, doubted myself, wondered if I had indeed become a monster. But then Aunt Margaret came to see me. She sat in my small apartment, her hands warm over mine, and said, "Clara, do not carry guilt that is not yours. They built a life on lies. You only brought the truth to light. If they had loved you, if they had respected you, none of this would have been necessary." Her voice steadied me like an anchor in rough seas. Natalie, my cousin, sent me another message. She wrote, "I do not blame you. I know what you endured. They needed to be exposed. Hold your head high." That message stayed pinned to my phone screen for weeks, a reminder that even in the storm, I was not alone. The consequences deepened as winter dragged on. The bank moved forward with foreclosure proceedings. Without my steady payments, my parents fell behind quickly. They tried to juggle bills, begged neighbors for loans, but the cracks were too wide. By March, the house was sold at a loss, and they moved into a small rental on the edge of town. My father picked up extra shifts as a security guard, his shoulders slumped. Pride gone. My mother added hours at the dental office, her voice no longer commanding but weary. The empire they had built on favoritism and illusion had collapsed. Ryan lived with them again, sulking, blaming me for everything. He took a job at a sporting goods store, complaining loudly that retail was beneath him, that I had ruined his chances with investors. But he never took responsibility. He never admitted the truth. To him, I was the villain who had destroyed his life, and maybe that was true in his eyes. But in mine, I had only lifted the veil he had wrapped around himself. The whispers never stopped. Every community gathering carried a hint of scandal. My mother once prided herself on commanding respect. Now she avoided eye contact. My father, who once lectured others on hard work and discipline, now trudged silently to work. They had wanted me to carry their burdens forever. Instead, they carried their own shame. I will not lie. Watching their downfall stirred conflicting emotions in me. There were nights I felt guilt, nights I lay awake, wondering if I had gone too far, if I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But then I remembered that dinner table, the crack of Ryan's slap, the taste of blood, my mother's venom, my father's decree that I was no longer family. They had already cut me out long before I revealed anything. They had already chosen violence, humiliation, and silence over love. All I had done was stop covering for them. Margaret's words replayed again and again. "Clara, you have done what needed to be done. They must face consequences." And slowly I began to believe her. Each time guilt rose, I reminded myself I did not create the truth. I simply refused to bury it any longer. In the months that followed, I noticed a strange shift in myself. For years, I had carried the weight of their needs, their bills, their crises. Now, with the weight lifted, I felt lighter, freer. I laughed more easily. I slept without nightmares. My apartment began to feel like home rather than a bunker. I bought new furniture, painted the walls, hung photos from my military unit, reminders of a family that had chosen me rather than blood, that had rejected me. The cascade of consequences had not just fallen on them. It had fallen on me too, but differently. They lost their house, their status, their illusions. I lost my chains. They faced whispers of shame. I faced whispers of cruelty. But for the first time, I chose not to silence myself, not to retreat into guilt. For the first time, I stood tall in the storm. I understood now that exposing Ryan was never about revenge. It was about balance. For decades, I had given, sacrificed, endured. They had taken, consumed, and demanded more. That night at Margaret's table, the scales finally tipped. The consequence cascade was not punishment. It was gravity. They had sown imbalance. The truth made them reap it. And as spring arrived with sunlight breaking through long gray skies, I realized something profound. The battlefield was no longer at their table. It was within me. The war for my dignity, my worth, my freedom had been won. I had chosen myself. And in that choice, I had finally broken the pattern that had bound me since childhood. Spring came slowly to Michigan, thawing the frozen ground and softening the edges of a world that had felt so harsh. For the first time in years, I did not wake up to a new crisis, a new demand for money, a new guilt-ridden phone call from my parents. My mornings were my own. I brewed coffee without dread. I opened windows and let sunlight in. The bruises on my face had faded, but the memory of that slap of blood dripping onto a napkin remained vivid. Instead of breaking me, though, it became a reminder of the line I had finally drawn. I began therapy in early January, pushed gently by Aunt Margaret and encouraged by Natalie's quiet support. At first I resisted. Soldiers are taught to endure, to push forward, to compartmentalize pain. But therapy was different. It was not about endurance. It was about excavation, digging through years of buried wounds to see what had been festering. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Harris, who specialized in family trauma, looked at me kindly as I recounted the years of favoritism, the financial exploitation, the slap that shattered my teeth. She listened without judgment, then said words that cracked something open inside me. "Clara, you were conditioned to believe your worth was tied to what you could give, not who you were. That conditioning was not love. That was control." Each week, I sat in her office, peeling back layers of guilt and resentment. I learned to name the pattern gaslighting, scapegoating, favoritism. I saw clearly that my parents had built their identity on Ryan's illusion and had used me as the invisible backbone, the silent provider. Naming it did not erase the pain, but it gave me a map. It gave me power. I also joined a support group for adult children of toxic families. Sitting in a circle with strangers who carried scars similar to mine felt both heartbreaking and healing. One woman spoke of covering her parents' debts for years only to be disowned when she finally said no. A man told of being erased by siblings who had been favored since childhood. Their stories echoed mine, and for the first time I realized I was not alone. The cycle of favoritism and control was not unique to me. It repeated across countless households. That recognition gave me strength. Meanwhile, I built a new life outside the shadow of my family. I moved into a brighter apartment, one with big windows and a small balcony where I grew plants. I hung photos of my unit smiling faces in uniform, people who had seen me bleed in training, but never once told me I was nothing. I saved money that once drained into my parents' accounts. I bought furniture that was mine, not secondhand cast-offs. Each small purchase, each framed picture felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. By summer, I even booked a weekend trip to Chicago alone for me. I stayed in a hotel I had once paid for my parents, walked the city streets, ate at a fine restaurant. As I sat by the window looking out over the skyline, I realized this was the life I could have had all along if I had not been shackled by guilt. The contrast was staggering, but it filled me with determination never to go back. My parents tried, of course. Letters arrived, emails filled with pleas. My mother wrote long passages about forgiveness, never once apologizing, but insisting family must stay together. My father sent one short message: "You have made your point. Stop this now." Ryan's voicemails remained venomous, dripping with blame. I saved them all but responded to none. It was not cruelty. It was clarity. They had declared me no longer family. I was simply honoring their decree. The old urge to fix them surfaced sometimes, especially late at night, when memories crept in. But each time I pressed my tongue against the gap in my teeth, felt the faint scar on my lip, and remembered that table. Remembered Ryan's smirk, my father's knife-carving turkey, while I bled my mother's hiss. Those memories anchored me in my decision. Healing did not mean forgetting. It meant refusing to repeat. By fall, I noticed changes in myself. I laughed more easily, slept more deeply. I found myself standing taller at work, no longer shrinking into the role of the quiet provider. I even started a small side business in web development, something I had dreamed of for years but postponed because my money was always siphoned away. Now the profits went into my own account. Watching the balance grow gave me a thrill that was equal parts financial and emotional. For the first time, I was building a future on my terms. Then, unexpectedly, I met Michael. He was an architect introduced by a mutual friend at a veterans event. On our third date, sitting in a quiet restaurant, I told him the truth. I told him about the estrangement, the slap, the years of being treated as expendable. I expected him to recoil, to pity me, to judge. Instead, he reached across the table, took my hand, and said simply, "Family is who treats you like you matter." His words struck deep, not because they were new, but because they echoed the lesson I had been struggling to embrace. Slowly, I let myself believe I deserved love without conditions. Thanksgiving came again, 1 year after the night everything shattered. This time, I did not drive to my parents' house, did not sit at a table where humiliation waited. Instead, I hosted a small dinner in my apartment. The guests were not those who had watched me bleed in silence. They were those who had stood by me. Aunt Margaret, her hands steady and warm. Natalie, who had sent quiet words of support. Michael, whose presence was calm and strong. A couple of friends from my unit who had seen me at my strongest and weakest. We laughed. We shared stories. We raised our glasses not to Ryan's imaginary successes, not to my parents' illusions, but to survival, to truth, to chosen family. As candles flickered and the city lights glowed outside, I thought back to that bloody napkin, to my father's decree, to the moment my childhood illusions died. And I realized something I had not understood then. That slap had not just broken my teeth, it had freed me. My father thought he was casting me out, but in truth, he handed me the key to my own liberation. My mother thought her violence would silence me, but it gave me the strength to speak louder than ever. Ryan thought his smirk proved my weakness, but it revealed his dependence. They had underestimated me. They thought I would crumble. Instead, I rose. When I looked in the mirror later that night, I no longer saw the invisible daughter or the family ATM. I saw Clara Mitchell, soldier survivor woman who endured, who resisted, who chose herself. The lesson burned clear. Real family is not about blood or money. Real family is about the people who see you, value you, and never let you bleed alone at the table. Sometimes those people share your DNA. Sometimes they are the ones you choose along the way. What matters is that you never again settle for relationships that diminish your worth. The hardest decision I ever made was to walk away from the family I was born into, but it was also the most important. Because in walking away, I finally found the strength to stand tall on my own. When I look back at the year that followed that night, I see not just a story of violence and betrayal, but a story of awakening. For decades, I believed loyalty meant carrying the burdens of others without complaint. I believed love was measured by how much pain you could endure in silence. But what happened at that Thanksgiving table forced me to confront the truth. Silence is not love. Endurance is not loyalty. And family is not defined by who shares your last name, but by who stands beside you when you are bleeding. To those listening right now, I want you to picture that table with me. Imagine sitting there passing a bowl of mashed potatoes only to be struck across the face by the brother you once built sandcastles with in the yard. Imagine teeth shattering, blood filling your mouth, while the people who were supposed to protect you sit frozen, or worse, look away. Imagine the sting of your father's words cutting deeper than the slap itself. Paying bills does not make you family. That was the moment I stopped being the obedient daughter and started being the woman who demanded justice. But justice did not come from courts or police reports. It came from truth. It came from refusing to carry secrets that were never mine to carry. Ryan's infertility was not my shame to protect. It was his and my parents' insistence on burying it while they paraded his arrogance at my expense was the final straw. When I revealed it, I was not being vindictive. I was shifting the weight of shame back where it belonged. For years, I had been told I was nothing. That night, I showed them the reality I was the one who held the power all along. Many of you listening know what it means to be the invisible one, the reliable one, the forgotten one. You are the sibling who was never celebrated, the child who was told to endure while others were excused. Maybe you are the one who pays the bills, covers the debts, keeps the house from collapsing while those around you squander and boast. And maybe, like me, you have wondered if your sacrifices would ever be recognized, if your loyalty would ever earn love. I am here to tell you it will not. Not from people who see you only as a resource. Walking away is not betrayal. Walking away is survival. It is the bravest act you can commit for yourself. I know many of you are older. Many of you have endured your own Thanksgiving nightmares or Christmas humiliations moments when you realized you would never be enough for those who were supposed to love you unconditionally. I want you to know you are not alone. This story is not just mine. It belongs to every person who has been scapegoated, overlooked, drained, dismissed. When I exposed Ryan, the consequences cascaded through my family. Engagements ended, reputations crumbled, finances collapsed. At first, I wondered if I had gone too far. But healing has taught me something important. Consequences are not cruelty. Consequences are truth catching up. My parents built their lives on favoritism and denial. Ryan built his life on arrogance and deceit. They expected me to carry those illusions forever. When I refused, the natural weight of reality fell where it was always meant to fall. Now, 1 year later, I see that night as both an ending and a beginning. It was the end of my silence, the end of my chains, the end of my illusions. But it was the beginning of my freedom, my chosen family, my healing. The scar on my lip reminds me daily that I am not weak. I am the woman who stood up bleeding and declared, "No more." To every person watching or listening, if you have ever felt invisible at your own table, if you have ever been told you are nothing while you sacrifice everything, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not nothing. You are not expendable. You are not defined by the love your family refuses to give. You are defined by the strength it takes to stand when they try to break you. I share this not just as confession, but as invitation. Think about your own story. Have you ever been forced into the role of caretaker, scapegoat, invisible provider? Have you ever been struck physically, emotionally, or verbally and told it was your fault? Told to stay quiet? Told to forgive without apology? How did you respond? Did you endure? Did you walk away? Did you find the courage to speak your truth? I want to know. Share it in the comments below because your story matters too. This channel is not just about my voice. It is about creating a place where those who have endured toxic families can find recognition, can find solidarity, can find courage. When you write your story, you are not only helping yourself, you are helping someone else who is sitting silently in their own pain, waiting for a sign that they are not alone. I know some of you might say, but Clara, family is family. Blood is thicker than water. I once believed that too, but I have learned something different. Blood might bind you genetically, but it does not guarantee loyalty. What truly matters is who shows up, who values you, who refuses to let you bleed alone. My chosen family, the aunt who stood by me, the cousin who sent quiet words of support, the comrades who lifted me through training, the man who reached across a dinner table and told me I mattered. These are my real family, and they can be yours too if you are brave enough to choose differently. Healing is not easy. There are nights I still wake up with the echo of my father's words in my ears. There are mornings when guilt tries to creep back whispering that I abandoned them. But then I look around my apartment filled with laughter warmth reminders of my own choices, and I know the truth. I did not abandon them. They abandoned me when they chose humiliation over love. I want you to hold on to this image. A woman sitting at her own Thanksgiving table 1 year later, surrounded not by those who struck her, but by those who saw her. Glasses raised, candles flickering, laughter filling the room. That is freedom. That is family. That is what you deserve, too. If you are still enduring humiliation for the sake of peace, let this story be your sign. Peace built on silence is not peace. It is bondage. Real peace begins when you honor your own worth, when you refuse to let others define it for you. Now, I want to hear from you. What was the moment you realized your family would never see you the way you needed? Was it a holiday like mine, or a smaller everyday cruelty? Did you walk away, or are you still searching for the courage to share your story below? And if you have never experienced this kind of pain, but you know someone who has shared this video with them, let them know they are not alone. To my audience, especially those of you over 50 who have lived enough years to know that family can be both blessing and curse, I ask you to reflect. If you had one chance to speak to your younger self, the child who endured favoritism, who carried guilt, who was silenced, what would you say? Write it below. Someone out there needs to read it. And if this story has touched you, if it has stirred something inside you, subscribe to this channel. We are building not just a platform for stories, but a community where truth is honored and silence is broken. Every time you comment, every time you share, you are helping someone else take their first step toward freedom. As I close, I return to the vow I made that night, standing bleeding at my parents' table. They had told me I was nothing, but I stand here now speaking to you knowing I am not nothing. I am Clara Mitchell. I am a soldier, a survivor, a woman who chose truth over silence. And I want you to remember this. You are not nothing either. You are seen. You are valuable. You deserve a family that lifts you, not one that breaks you. Now it is your turn. Tell me what is the truth. You are ready to speak.